Hi, this is Hitchhiker's Guide to Humanity. My name is Krys Copeland. I am the human for Krystal the alien, and I'm here today with Roni from Nairobi, Kenya, the human of Mako the alien. And Roni is here to talk to me today about a really sensitive topic, racism and systemic racism, and also a lot of issues about poverty and famine and a lot of the misconceptions that white Westerners, particularly white Westerners, but Westerners of all colors, have about Africa. And so, Roni, let's just go ahead and introduce you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I'm Ronians, but you can call me Roni for short, and I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, like Krystal said. Ethnically, I'm from the western part of Kenya, but I was born and raised in Nairobi. I'm also an environmentalist and just big on social issues and social development issues. Yeah.
Awesome. So then that kind of will bring me just to like the first generalized misconception that a lot of people have about Africa. That it's starting to people are starting to become more educated about it, but the fact that not all Africans are from one tribe. And that's the same misconception that people have about Native Americans too, that all of us came from one tribe and we all were living in harmony and, singing Kumbaya together, and that's actually not the case. We fought with each other constantly because we had disagreements between each other over access to resources, like hunting grounds.
Yeah.
So what's that
And
like in Kenya?
It's not like really when you're in Western countries. Sometimes somebody comes and asks you like, are you from Africa, or how is Africa like? And you're not from Africa as in Africa is a continent. You're from Kenya, which is a country in itself. So some people just like really generalize the African thing. There are a lot of different tribes. Like Kenya has 42 different tribes. So you can be a Kenyan, but a LUO Kenyan with the completely different cultures, different values, different outlooks and perspectives on life and issues. Yeah, so it's like really, really different for each and every community, each and every tribe in terms of culture and everything else.
So then in Kenya, it sounds a lot more like politics in America, where there's a bisection of the populace based on beliefs and culture, and not so much about any other particular differences. So and that worked the same way in Native American tribes. Certain tribes did not like other tribes because they practiced a different way. Like the Eastern tribes would think badly of or think down on tribes from the West who were more kind of or less civilized. They would eat bugs instead of growing crops. So there was that difference between hunter-gatherer and the ones that were actually settling down and creating civilizations. So let's talk about that, how that divide relates to Kenya. Can you describe each of the tribes and kind of what their belief systems are?
Well, first of all, Kenya and the political climate of Kenya, like you said, the divide is between culture and your beliefs. That is the same for Kenya. In Kenya, you choose a political side based on your tribe. Basically, that is what happens. If you're Kikuyu, you support the Kikuyu leaders. If you're a Luo, you support NASA leaders or the Luo elders. It does not really matter what you think about their agenda or their issues or what is important to them. So in Kenya, like if you're Kikuyu, it is known that they do not, like, they're not really cultural people. Kikuyu is one of the bigger tribes in Kenya. We have Luos, we have Kikuyus, we have Luyas, we have Taitas, we have Mijikendas, we have Masais, but Luo, Kikuyu, Kambas, those are the bigger tribes in Kenya and the most vocal tribes in Kenya, and the Kalenjins. So there are some which are really very much cultural, and there are others who they don't really value a lot of culture. For instance, Kikuyus do not have a lot of these things we call taboos or beliefs about is, be it marriage, be it burials, be it their homesteads or things like that. Whereas when it comes to the Luos, they really hold on to their cultures and their traditions. So those are just a little bit of the kind of differences that we have between the tribes. Same to the Kalenjins. They're really specific. They drink blood. They have this particular milk that they drink. The Maasais are like blood and livestock and spear people and like warriors, considered warriors. Yeah, so just differences like that.
Yeah, so that actually kind of highlights some of the very interesting differences because while we don't have so Native Americans now are kind of bound to reservations, and in fact, with coronavirus breaking out, we're seeing a lot of differences in access for Native Americans along with African Americans in America to resources, and it's affecting Native American populations and African American populations at a much higher rate in America due to this lack of access to good health care, and to proper protective equipment, stuff like that. Are you seeing the same kinds of disconnects between access for certain tribes? Are they being disenfranchised because of their beliefs or backgrounds?
Yeah, there's a very big like difference between. It's not really about the tribes when it comes to issues such as like famine or poverty or things like that. The biggest divide is in terms of class, but also when you look at some of the poorest areas in, say, Nairobi, we have the biggest slums in Kibera, we have Mathare. You'll find that most of the people who live in these areas are from the western part of the country, like Luos, my tribe, Luos. I'm a Luo from from Western Kenya. So you find that most of these areas are populated by Luos or people from Western Kenya, Luyas and Kisis. While there's this tribe which has been in power for like since Kenya started. The first Kenyan president was a Kikuyu. The second Kenyan president was like from the Kalenjin, that kind of tribe. So these are the communities which have been in power. And if you look at the statistics on poverty and on people living in extreme poverty, you find that Kikuyus are not really at the same level as Sale was. I'm just comparing like general comparison of the estates in Kenya, which in Nairobi, which are like really very, very, very poor in Nairobi, Luos and people from the Western Kenya who have never been in power, who like consider themselves at the receiving end of oppression in terms of tribalism. We find that they're the ones who have like extreme limited access. And this also comes about when people are looking for jobs. There's a lot of tribalism when you're looking for a job in Kenya. So poverty like really affects the tribal divides as well in employment rates. For instance, if you're looking for a job and there's some organizations which are considered, that organization is like, you find somebody saying that organization is really like Kikuyu dominated, so there's no point of even me applying for a job there. That organization is like Luo dominated. There's no point of me applying for a job there. I'll not get it. They just hire their own people. So access in terms of employment was also extremely affected by tribal divides in this country.
That actually kind of relates back to also another connection with what's going on in America. So instead of it being tribal, like with Native Americans, just modern day America, it's become this racial divide, which, and we talked earlier about this, I believe is not a racial divide. I think it's a class divide. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But the thing I wanted to point out was that I know that I come from the privileged side of the divide, and I know that because there's a reason I'm sitting here in the Netherlands and not still stuck in Texas in poverty, in the terrible situations that I grew up in, like some of my, or well, the majority of my friends back home, and a lot of those friends are black and Mexican and or Mexican American, and they're not given the same opportunities that I was to escape from poverty. Um, Doors were opened for me because of the color of my skin, and I recognize that privilege that I have, but I also understand that what comes with that is a responsibility to make things equal, to reduce my privilege if I can, or not necessarily to reduce my privilege, but to make sure that all people have the same privilege that I do. Um, so let's go back to the differences between the tribes. And the first thing I want to do is make sure I'm pronouncing them correctly. So it's the LUO tribe, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the Kukua?
Kikuyu, Kikuyu, Kikuyu.
Kikuyu. Is that close?
That's actually correct.
Okay, good. So we've got the Luo and the Kikuyu, and I'll have to practice saying those as I get used to the sounds and the changes, because I speak very, very little Swahili, so the language is still very new to me. So I'll apologize if I butcher anything in Swahili in advance.
Okay.
So talking about the Luo culture, so if I want to make sure I understand this right, they're the ones that practice traditional values, and want to keep the old traditions alive.
Yes, if you, in comparison to the other communities which are really like extreme in terms of their cultures, like the Maasais and the Kalenjins, but if you compare Kikuyus and Luos, you find that Luos are more traditional and more into their beliefs and cultures than the Kikuyus. There's something we call in Kiswahili mila. Like if you translate it in English, it's something like beliefs. So the Kikuyus are not really mila oriented as much as the Luos. They don't have naming rights or things like that. For instance, in the Luo culture, and this also applies in the Western countries, I think. You take the name of your father, right?
Not exactly. That's a different. Most people take the name of their father. I have the name of my maternal grandfather because my father wasn't present at the birth and didn't sign the certificate. So sad story.
Yeah. So in in the Kikuyu culture or their way of naming, you find that a man can take the second name of his mother.
Oh.
Which is something that completely does not happen in the Luo culture. You have to take the name of your father or the male person in your family. So you can find a Kikuyu naming the child, maybe Jonathan, somebody, Wanjiru. The son name is Wanjiru. Wanjiru is a female name in Kikuyu. Wanjiru or Wanjiku.
Wanjiru.
That is a female name. So so you find somebody, a man or a woman with a surname that is feminine, that is female. That is not something you find in the Luo culture, naming culture. You cannot find, or I've not come across. It's not something that happens a lot. A Luo that is called maybe John, Omondi, Atieno. Atieno is a feminine name in Kenya. So Otieno is the masculine version. Yeah, Atieno is the feminine. So something like that, something as simple as that. And going back, there's a lot you can compare in terms of burial. A Luo person, when you die, it is customary or it is right that you're taken to your ancestral home to be buried. In the Kikuyu culture, you do not really have to be taken. It's not a must, or it's not even something that they do. You don't need to go to your ancestral home to be buried. You can be buried at a cemetery in town, in Nairobi, for instance. That is considered very, very bad to Luos. You cannot. It just doesn't happen. Even if you're dead and you don't have a home, Luos will go to the extreme level of making sure that there's land for you in your ancestral home. People will contribute money, buy you land, build your house, like a small structure to like act like a house, do their rights so that the woman you are allowed inside, your dead body will actually sleep inside that house before you're buried, so that you're buried in your ancestral home and not just in a cemetery in Nairobi or in a town or in a metropolitan area. That is something that is not there for you. You can just die, go to a cemetery, and you're buried, and that is that.
So that brings up quite a few questions for me as a Westerner, because this is outside of my wheelhouse as far as the amount of tradition involved. However, I do see similarities in those traditions to certain things we do in Western culture. People will buy expensive caskets and lavish funerals, and I don't want to sound at all like I'm putting down anyone's culture, but I'm just a very practical person. And I'm all about, okay, well, how can these resources be used to care for people on Earth, not people that have already passed. So, and I don't want to disrespect that belief that we need to honor our dead either. I definitely get that, and my background is that it's for the living though, and not for the dead. So that will be like something that I have to kind of wrap my head around. But it's also something I have to wrap my head around in my own culture. I don't understand why we have these lavish funerals and the expensive caskets to spend on someone who's not around to enjoy them. When there are people who could be using those resources for basic needs. And so that will be like a disconnect for me on it. But I want to kind of like get the LUO opinion on that. Why does this need to be done to preserve the culture, and why is it so important to do that? Even though there's all these other issues with poverty and basic needs access that are still ongoing. And I understand that this is going to be like the same thing with my own culture. Why are we spending all this money on lavish funerals when we have homelessness, when we have people starving, when we have people who can't get an education? So then, like, what is the other side to that? Like, what is the purpose? How is this good for the community by continuing these old practices? And I want to bring in that side of it, because I know there are some really good points to that. So why keep these old traditions?
First of all, I want to highlight something to show you the extremity of this like burial issue in Kenya, and for the Luos, for the Western people, let me say, because Luos and Luos are close in terms of their cultures. So you can be sick, like extremely sick, and you find that very many people will not contribute towards getting you healthy or paying for your medical expenses. You're sick, you're poor, you don't have a way of paying for your medical expenses. If you did, there's a chance that you might actually have survived the sickness. But the minute that you die, relatives from all over the country, wherever they are, people now start coming to your house, flocking your house for 2 weeks, as they contribute money for your burial, money that you could have used when you were still alive. Then immediately after that, they disappear. You remember, maybe if you're a man or a woman, you've left a family behind that needs to be taken care of, but they end up spending like hundreds of thousands or even millions or in burying you, and then after that, your family starts going hungry. But I think it is just there's something in Swahili that says machamila ni mtumwa, like and in Luos believe that if you go against these traditions, there's something that is called chira, or like a taboo, something like that. You can actually die if you go against these kinds of traditions. If you go against the elder people in the community telling you that this and this is what is supposed, this and this is what is supposed to be done. If a man dies in the Luo culture, you're supposed to sleep in your house. Your body is supposed to sleep in your house like a last right, your last right as a human being or on earth. So those are some of the things that just have to, they just have to happen. So they believe, or we believe, that if you do anything differently, there's this thing called chira that will follow you. The taboo will follow you, and it might actually kill you. People believe that. And if you were to go against this, and then you encounter some misfortune in the next like couple of months or even a year down the line, it is tied to you not accepting or going by the set traditions and cultures. So it is as a result of you going against your traditions. So the taboo is following you, and you have to be cleansed, or you have to do something to cleanse yourself so that you can be free of the taboo, something like that. So it's not like it's important. It helps people in this and this. There's just that belief that if you don't do it the way it's supposed to be done, something really bad will happen to you or your family.
So that actually it sounds like my childhood in a nutshell. I remember, in particular, so I went to an evangelical Christian church, and evangelical in Texas has a whole new level, like, of crazy. But there, so I remember in particular, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was at the church, and it's what we call catty corner to my house, which means diagonally across the street. So if it's it's an intersection, and my house is on one diagonal and it's on the opposite side of the diagonal. And we would play in that church. So the First Baptist Church in Purdon, Texas, and it had a string of very interesting characters back in the 90s as its pastors. One of them even went crazy and had to be locked up. So yeah, the systemic craziness in religion, and extreme religion, is something I'm familiar with on a personal level, unfortunately. And so this is why it relates back to my childhood. When I was 8 years old, I went to this revival at our church. And during the revival, they gathered all us kids up and got us really pumped up and excited and energetic about God or whatever. And I didn't really, at 8 years old, I don't understand what's going on. I'm having fun with my friends. We're all laughing and singing. I'm just here for the cookies, right? That's why I'm here. I want the cookies. I want to hang out with my friends. We want to sing. We want to have a good time. Yay, God's happy for us being here. Let's have fun. And then this whole night changed. It was a week-long revival as soon as this guest pastor stepped up on stage after being introduced by the crazy pastor. And the guest pastor started talking about hell. And that if we didn't repent of our sins, if we didn't fall down at the feet of God and beg Jesus for forgiveness for our evil deeds that we have committed, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, shit, I lied to my mom earlier today. Does that count? Oh my God, this is what I'm facing? Holy crap. And I mean, in my mind, I'm terrified because he's painting this vision of hellfire and damnation, and God will hate you forever, and you will be alone and miserable. And I mean, it had a deep effect on me as a child. And I was scared into becoming a Christian. I was terrified into becoming a Christian. So I went up to the altar and I was crying and I was throwing myself on it was sad. It was pathetic thinking back on it, that they had done this to not just me, but several of my friends, It was heart-wrenching thinking back on that we were put through that for their religion. And I remember asking the pastor, because he kept talking about, God won't kill babies. God won't do that to children. And I'm like, well, how do you know if you've reached this thing called the age of accountability they were talking about, where you were suddenly accountable for all the sins that you had in your life? And he just looked at me and he said, if you're questioning it, you're already there. And I'm 8 years old. I'm freaking out, thinking, oh God, I could die at any moment and go to hell. And he put that fear into me as a child. And I resent that to this day, that he made me scared of religion. To the point where now I'm an atheist. I just it's disenfranchised me so much to that idea that even if there was a God, his people have become so terrible that I don't want to be associated with them in any way. And that's sad because there are a lot of good things that come out of religion too. People are people beat drug addictions. They overcome sexual abuse using religion, using prayer, using that power. And it's something that I've been denied access to because of these early experiences, and how I can't let religion into my life anymore because there's this fear of what will happen if I'm sucked into that. So what is that like in LUO culture? With are children instilled with this fear from a young age, and so they're brought up in it systemically?
Yeah, we are brought up just known for the people who grow up in the rural areas. So they are like brought up really into such traditions and such cultures. You find there's a very big differences between a grown man who was brought up in the rural areas and with parents who like really hold on to those kinds of traditions, and somebody who was brought up in the metropolitan area, maybe in town, in Nairobi, and their parents are not really, they don't really hold on to those cultures like really very hard. But at the end of the day, you're a Luo. There's a lot of I'm using Luo men as a lot because a lot of these issues, a lot of these cultures are about the Luo man, because the man obviously in Kenya is considered, or in Africa or anywhere, is considered the head of the family. This is really pronounced in the African context or in the African culture. So they're brought up with that kind of fear, the taboo fear, the death fear when you go against taboos. So, like for instance, I can give an example of my experience. When my dad was like very young, he lost his parents very young. So it is also a tradition that for the Luos, you have to have a home in your ancestral home. My father is the second born in their family. The elder son, it is customary that the eldest son has to build his house first before you build your own house. You as the second born or the third born or the fourth born. So the first son has to open like the doors for you. So the fact that being that my grandparents died when my dad was very young, they were brought up like in different places. So his elder brother is not somebody who's like really has really held on to such traditions and such cultures. Up to today, when we are talking, he still doesn't have his own customary land or place at home. But the fact that it was rooted in my father. He was a believer that like you have to build. So he had to go and buy land and building things and stuff for his elder brother so that he can force his elder brother into building a house so that he can pave way for him. It can pave way for him to also build the house. When this did not happen, it started like bringing a lot of issues. Somebody falling ill. My dad died a couple of years ago. So his illness and things like that. So people in the village start talking that it is because some of these traditions were not followed to the latter, things like that. So it follows somebody throughout your life. You find yourself going to like very extreme measures, like you're buying land for somebody who does not like hold these traditions and these beliefs very dear, but because it was instilled in you from a very young age that this is what like really has to happen. So you use your millions or hundreds of thousands of Kenyan shillings to try and make it that to try and make it that you can also abide to this tradition, so that the taboo and the death that comes with breaking the taboos that does not follow you.
Yeah, that brings up a lot of questions in my mind around Yeah, the not just the idea of the man's role in Luo culture, but also the women's role, and I want to talk about that because it sounds very much like American culture, including even I think African American culture in particular. Because a lot of African American families are more traditional. They follow Christianity. A lot of them also follow Islam, but they follow it very religiously, and not in like extremely violent ways or anything like that. But like they will shun people in the community if they're not following the appropriate behaviors, especially and this happens in white communities too, especially poor white communities. They will shun people for being gay. They will shun people for having abortions. They will shun people for leaving the church or not coming to church on Sundays regularly. I mean, there's a lot of different things and this is probably less so now that it's like 2020, but certainly when I was growing up, this is what I saw in the 90s. And so then my question on that is women's role in Luo culture, and especially the role of feminism, and is that changing, or what has changed in your lifetime? Because in comparison to the society I live in now in the Netherlands, we still have a pay gap between men and women, but it's mostly a motherhood gap, not an actual pay gap. So when women become mothers and they start staying at home, they don't have as many opportunities for their career. But women here choose to do that. It's their choice. They have options for abortion and birth control if they don't want to have kids. So it's not seen as an issue as much here because these are choices that they're making. And the fathers also have the right to do the same thing, but generally speaking, mothers just stay at home more. And that may just be because we're humans, and most females are nurturing and most females want to do that, but not everyone does, and that's okay. So then as far as the difference in American culture with that, there is an actual pay gap based on your gender. There is discrimination towards women based on what they can do or what they're seen as good at. In particular, I remember stories of going to women who went to the doctor and wanted to have their tubes tied so they wouldn't have any more children, or didn't want to have children ever because they had some kind of for whatever reason they didn't want kids. It could have been just as simple as the earth is overpopulated and they didn't want to. And every single time doctors would refuse them that and say that they needed their husband to sign off on an operation for their body. And when men go and get vasectomies in America, they're not asking their wives about it. So there's that divide. And I want to know if that's something that you experience in Luo culture as a Luo woman. Is that changing for you? What opportunities are now available to you, and where do you think that's headed in the future?
In the Luo culture, if you're a woman, your role is to be submissive to your man. That is basically it. There's no specific, everything that you do has to be in service to your husband, basically. So that your role is to take care of your husband, take care of your home, bear children for your husband, period. This feminism and things like that, just for the modern person, and in the Luo culture, you're seen and you're not for lack of a better word, a wife material. You cannot make a good wife because you want to take the role over your husband, which is considered extremely wrong. If you cannot bear children for your husband is allowed to marry a second wife who can bear children for him, something like that. It's like that extreme. Your role is to, if we are focusing on the complete traditions of the Luo people, you're there to serve your man, take care of your husband, take care of your home, bear children for your husband. If you cannot bear children, a second wife is brought into the homestead to bear children, or even your sister. A Luo man can be given by the in-laws. You're given your younger, if you're a wife to a Luo man in the Luo culture, and you cannot bear children for your husband. Your sister is given to your husband to help fill that gap that you cannot take care of. You're like less than. So your sister has to go to your home to try and fill that gap so that your husband feels like he has truly gotten the entire package that he deserves as a LUO man or as a man.
Wow, that's very different from what you're used to in Western culture. For one, well, actually, the biggest difference is they just don't bring the women into the house and they sneak around behind your back. So, um, honestly, it seems like a more honest way of dealing with those emotions that men will have over, biology and needing to produce an heir and all of those things. It's actually quite different in comparison to the culture in the Netherlands. When I went for my first classes on citizenship and participation in the Netherlands as a resident, one of the first things they discussed was equality, especially equality between gender, and specifically the person conducting the class noted and was in particular looking at the Muslim women in the room who were with their husbands, and said, "You are now equal to your husbands in this country. You can tell them to help out with the chores. You can tell them that you have a say in things that go on in the house." And here, Dutch men help with the chores. Now, my significant other does daily does chores around the house. He cooks almost daily as well. In fact, because of my health conditions, some days he will help me out with my portion of the chores, just because my back is out or I'm having some kind of severe health issue. And it wasn't anything that he even questioned. Of course he was going to do it. That's just the culture here. Of course men help out. They're 50% of the household, so they create 50% of the mess, usually more, and they're expected to help clean that mess. So, and honestly, I coming from a culture where that was less so, I was the one doing a lot of the housework at home, even though I was also working. And definitely when I was married to an American man, definitely that chore load was put more on me as the mother and the wife than it was on him culturally. And I think most American women experience that. But here it's definitely not like that. And honestly, it's refreshing to be treated like a full human being for the first time in my life. Yeah, so let's touch on another subject with that, the poly relationships. There's polyamory practiced in LUO culture, and it's done for biological reasons, for passing on an heir. But the how are women reacting to that? Are women happy with this situation? Are they comfortable with it, or are they looking to something more monogamous at least, or at least more equal, where they can also step out of the relationship if they're not satisfied with it? How is that transitioning as we move into this modern era?
As a woman, you absolutely cannot step out of your marriage and it be considered as an acceptable thing in the society. And polygamy in the LUO culture or in the African culture, it's not really for procreation purposes or for getting an heir. You can find a man who has 5 children, but still, because they are allowed to marry more than one woman, or they are just itching to have more than one woman, they still marry 2, 3, 4, even up to 5 wives. So long as you can take care of them, you marry them. But obviously, every woman would love to have their own man, to be in a monogamous type of relationship. But since maybe you're not able to take care of yourself financially, something like you don't have a job, you're not able to take care of your kids financially, you have 5 kids in this marriage, you don't have a job or you're not working, your work is to stay at home, take care of your kids, take care of your husband, take care of your home. If your husband comes and tells you that I am marrying another wife, most of them think this is their type of thinking. So if I decide to up and leave, where do I go with my 5 children? Who will marry me with my 5 children? How will I feed myself and my 5 children? So you just suck it up and stay in the marriage. Of course, no woman that I have had in the LUO culture or otherwise says that I want my husband to marry 2, 3, or 4 or 5 women. The first option is also always monogamy, but since it's allowed and they do it all the time, so you just suck it up and accept it as it is. But women going out of their marriage and having sex with multiple partners, or that is completely unacceptable. You can find a man has 3 wives in the home, but the minute you, one of the wives, gives even the slightest attention to another man, you're not even like having sex with a man or something like that. You're just showing interest in friendship to another man. The man has every right to chase you out of the home, to get like completely pissed and things like that. And this is a man who sleeps around with women all the time, like all the time, and openly has 3 wives, secretly is out there like engaging in sexual activities and multiple relationships with all other women. So it's completely different here. There's that equality in terms of issues of relationships and marriages. The man is like completely superior when it comes to such things. In Kenya and in the Luo culture, the man is completely superior when it comes to such. There are some instances when you find that your husband, like the other day I was reading in this Luo group on Facebook, some woman was asking for advice. The husband died a couple of years ago, and she has been wanting to get into another relationship. There's this man who takes care of her, things like that. But the mother-in-law to this woman still considers her married to her son and is not giving her peace and not allowing her to move on with her life because she's considered still married to this man. So such kind of things. It's like the man in these issues is completely superior, and that I don't see that changing anytime soon.
So then what I'm trying to figure out is, why are women putting up with it then? If you're the ones that can bear the children that they want, if you're the ones that are taking care of them, that are cooking for them, that are cleaning for them, then how can they live without you if you just cut off access?
Most of the time, it comes down to the finances of the home. Because you find that most women who are independent do not put up with such things. Who can take care of themselves don't put up with such things. People might disagree with this, but this is actually what happens. This is the real reason that most people stay in such relationships. There's that, first of all, there's that stigma. First of all, there's that stigma that comes with the fact that you have left your home, you are married, but you've left your home, you cannot take care of a man, you cannot hold down a home. That is one thing. So you just decide to stay because they don't want to be seen as people who could not make it in marriage in their own home. So they are seen as outcasts in their communities and things like that. But one thing that I know for sure is the main reason for these people staying in this, for these women staying in these marriages, is the fact that the man is the provider. The man is the one who provides, who caters for everything that you have or that your kids need. So the minute that you step out of the home, it's like, where am I going to? How am I going to feed my children? How am I going to live after this? So just have to sit and take it all in. But there are also people who are just like not really okay with it, but they've accepted it. That it is what is happening. If so long as the man is taking care of his responsibilities in the home, he can go ahead and marry 2 or 3 women if he wants to. Maybe you've just given up on the marriage or the marriage is not rooted on love or something like that. It's shared, taking care, the responsible thing, taking care of your family, building a family. People also see marriage in this country or in these cultures as like the ultimate thing in life. You have to be, at some point you have to be married. That is considered a very big achievement, like a necessary, and not really necessary, but like the very step in life that you just absolutely have to take in your life. So if you're a woman in your 30s and you're not yet married, you're considered somebody who's like extremely less than in the society. So if a man has kept you in a house and married you, you consider that a privilege. The fact that you have a husband, you have your own home, you're privileged. So even if there's all these extramarital affairs and all these issues in your marriage, the fact that you're married, that is good enough for you, because society dictates that marriage is absolutely like you just have to do it as a woman or as a Kenyan or an African woman. There's no other way.
I have a feeling that LUO men would absolutely hate me because I am divorced twice. And I have no interest in ever marrying again. I make enough money to support myself, so I would never have a need for a man to support me. And I feel so privileged to be in that situation because it could have been, and in fact in America it was very different for me. I was in a controlling relationship that was emotionally abusive and became physically and sexually abusive at the end. And I put up with it for so long because I felt like I couldn't make it on my own. My mother constantly even told me, well, he's got a good job, so you should stay with him. And I felt so devalued, as a person. Like, this is what I'm worth? Just this? This? No. I'm worth more than that. And I really had to, like, work to take back my power as a woman, and I've been doing that over the past 3 years since I've gotten divorced, and it was hard. It was sad. The amount of like emotional trauma that I had to recover from because of the systemic oppression of women, even in my own society, which is a modern society full of modern technology and not at all following like or at least not supposed to be following like what would be considered like tribal ideals regarding marriage and things like that. But the only difference between my ex-husband and a LUO man is that my ex-husband was doing his shit in the dark and not telling me. A LUO man is at least going to be honest about it. And so I kind of see that, even though it's still like, wow, that's not enough to commit my life to someone else, just that little bit. It's still at least better than I think the situation I was in, like emotionally, because at least I would have expected what was coming. But also that's kind of sad because since they expect what's coming, as a LUO woman, you expect what's coming, so you just don't fight it when it happens. You don't realize that you're worth more. And that kind of like that really affects me deeply when you talk about like what LUO women go through, because I feel like none of you are valuing yourself the way you should. You're worth so much more than what you're getting out of your culture, and out of marriages. It's just, to me it seems like there's a lot of room for growth and change, but you're right, the first problem is getting women financially independent from men. That would be the first step. So at least that way they're making a decision that's not based out of fear. And that they're making a decision based on, okay, well, I want to commit to my cultural values, so then I can do that. And if women want to do that, that's great. If they want to make this relationship work and they want to practice their religion and their culture in a traditional way, that's great if they choose to do that. But what I'm hearing from you is that the women aren't choosing to do that. They're being forced to do that. So then what are your options for like, or do people even like seek out change for that? Or have they just given up hope completely? Do they want change?
Yes, people want change. Most women want change. There are some who have like gotten their financial independence and just tell them to like they are going out on their own and they're changing things and they're changing their lives and moving out of such abusive relationships. In as much as that happens, there are also some who, like you just said, they make the decision out of fear. So there are a lot of changes, especially nowadays. Women are becoming more independent and they're taking less of these issues from men, but there are some who are still stuck there, obviously. And the biggest, I think one of, apart from the financial thing, one of the other biggest issues is this society mindset that marriage is. I wish most women, most Kenyan women, or most LUO women would have your kind of mindset. You can take care of yourself. You don't need a man. And if you do not find a man who can respect you as you are, it is not a must that you get married. It is just the ultimate goal of life that you get married. But in this society, it is an ultimate goal in life that you just have to get married.
Yeah, and to me, like the whole idea of marriage in itself, honestly, just frightens me at this point because I've had two really bad marriages, and it felt like I could not be a whole person inside a relationship, and especially inside a marriage. And I am in a relationship now, and I feel like a whole person. My activities, my interests are not dependent on what he does. He has completely separate interests, completely separate activities, and I feel like that's okay. I don't have to be. My ex-husband was one of those type of men that had to be around me constantly, to the point where he was stalking me. It got to that extreme, and it felt like such an invasion. I could not be alone with myself. I couldn't be alone with friends, and that really took a toll on me because while I was very much in love with him when we first got married, and it developed a really deep friendship over time, he turned into this person or showed that he became this person or had it in him to become this person that was very different from the person I agreed to marry. And I think that the reason for that is I didn't give myself enough time to find out if he was really who he said he was. And I just kind of got sucked into it. My mother was pushing me to get married to him. He had these plans to join the military, and if I didn't get married to him, then he wouldn't be able to go. And then all of a sudden, right after our marriage, all those plans for him going into the military just dropped, and it became like a 13-year pattern of him leeching my money, my resources, my time, and my energy. And it wasn't like that in the beginning. I think I didn't understand who I was, and I didn't understand who he was. He didn't understand himself, and he was not the right match for me. Now, he has since found a wife that has those same kind of traditional ideals and things like that, and their relationship works out much better than ours from everything I've heard. So, and I'm happy for that. I think that's great that he was finally able to find someone that understood and could deal with his emotional and mental health issues in a way that was positive, because at that point it had become so toxic in our relationship I could not deal with it anymore. And I think that if I hope that LUO women will start realizing that they have value more than what they're receiving, and if they approach relationships when they're in their teens or in their early 20s as like a trial period to like prove your worth, prove that you are worth the amount that I'm going to be giving you in the future, and kind of test that out. And it should be from both sides. I think that's also like the man has the right to do that too. Are you going to be the woman that I need you to be in this relationship? And start talking about that more openly. Then a relationship can be founded on communication and trust and friendship and agreed upon ideals, and that can bring about like truly lifetime compatibility there, to where a monogamous relationship is more likely. So, like, is that something that you could see young women, even like teenagers and 20-somethings, being taught to be cautious when they enter in these new relationships, or even just bring back some of those so in LUO culture, Were arranged marriages ever a thing in the past?
In the past, I think there used to be such kinds of things, but it has not really been a big part of our culture. I don't think it happens nowadays. I
So
don't think so. Arranged marriages are not a big part.
the thing I've studied arranged marriage from a lot of different cultures, and the one thing that I see consistently in cultures where arranged marriage works well is that the first like 10 years of that before they get married is like a trial thing. Like the two kids will meet each other as children, the families will talk, they'll see how the kids get along, they grow up together, there's a friendship bond that's built, and they're really like testing to see if these kids are going to be compatible as they grow up. And I think if we brought in those good things about arranged marriage, about like bringing it in as a cultural community, like people giving advice, like is this a couple that works out well together? Do they click well together? Do they have the same ideals, the same goals, the same path that they want to take in life? And that would really like help not just the young women to make good decisions, but also the young men, so that way they're working together to create a union that is lasting, that will survive rough times. That when there's a tragedy that happens, they don't run into another person's arms; that they run towards each other. So, is that a possibility in Luo culture? Is that something that could be built from the ground up, from women helping other women?
I think that is something that absolutely needs to happen. People need to be, there needs to be like good role models to teach the young and the upcoming generations about such kind of things. Because you find somebody as young as, let's say, younger than me, in their 20s, and they are stuck in abusive marriages, in these kinds of marriages. It's not something that was there in the past that has been happening, say, the last 50 years or to the older generation of people. It is something that is still happening to this very young generation of people. So I think Luo women or women of the African culture just need to be taught their value and to understand their value as women, as people, not as women, but as a whole person, and how to exist in relationships as a whole person, as you've said, and not just to be submissive to the point that it is actually derailing your life. It is. I don't think marriages need to be about just the name or I'm married. So what? You need to be happy in that marriage. It's about helping each other, being happy together. You're not supposed to be sad and tolerant of every situation. Every day you're just crying and crying like you married an onion. You work in the relationship, you just cry. And I actually I've heard of what have a couple of friends who every single day in their marriage it is just issues and crying and issues and crying about this and this and this and this. And these are very young people who have their whole lives in front of them that they can, if they are taught right, or if they see their parents or other women in society doing things the right way, they can emulate that and find their own independence and find their own voice in this marriage, these institutions that they call marriages, which are, I don't think that is what a marriage is supposed to be like. I'm not married myself, I've never been married, but
That's smart.
if one day, yeah, if one day I am to get married, I would want that marriage to not be something that I have to tolerate on a daily basis. Uh, of course, there are issues which come about in marriage. Every relationship has issues, but that should not be the biggest chunk of the marriage. Issues and problems and crying every single day. It's supposed to be a happy thing, a supportive thing. You have a life partner who supports you and who supports your dreams, supports you as an independent human being, not sees you as somebody who has to service him, as a doormat that you can step on, and that you can do anything and everything to you. He's a superior. No one is supposed to be superior
No.
in a relationship
Yeah.
or in a marriage. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think our women, our young women need to be taught this. And there's something you mentioned about your mom that I also see a lot in Luo mother-in-laws or African mother-in-laws. if you're married to in a wealthy home, or to a man who has something in his pocket, who can take care of you well. So a woman, a mother will ask you, so where do you want to go? You want to go back to a poor man who cannot take care of you. That man is wealthy, he has money, he can take care of you well, so
Mm-hmm.
just suck it up. Every marriage has problems. That is the line that they
Yeah.
use. Marriage is not easy. That is the line that is used commonly. Marriage is not easy. Sit in your home and mend the things that are broken and take care of your home. But I don't think that is what marriage is supposed to be like. Fixing and mending problems and sucking and just taking every bad thing in all the time, all the time.
Yeah.
You need to be happy. You need to find happiness also. If you're not happy,
Absolutely.
then yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I want to, so you mentioned, so do you mind sharing your age with us? How old are you?
I'm
Okay.
27.
27. So I'm looking at like the average ages for marriage. And so just a quick, I know the average age for Americans is about 23, 24 to get married. And in the Netherlands, it's 30. And their marriages last longer here. You know, we have a 50% divorce rate in America, whereas the divorce rate here is only 25%. So that cut the divorce rate in half just by delaying the age of marriage. And I'm looking at Kenya stats. Kenya is right there with America. Average age for men is 24, average age for women is 21.
Yeah.
And so by you beating those averages, by you getting past those as a LUO woman, you, how has that changed your life? How has that made your life better by not settling in to the first man who comes along?
I don't. I've always wanted to. Of course, I want to get married at some point, but I think it's me taking my time
Mm-hmm.
and me working on myself first and ensuring that I am stable enough to not take any, like, for lack of a better word, crap from any man. I think that will make me a better person and will make me a happier person even in marriage in future. If I was to commit to marriage at say 21 or 22 or 23 years, as the statistics of society dictates, then I would not be at that point in life. I was not an independent person. I would be completely dependent on this man, and say this man is not a good husband to me, so that I'd be stuck in that marriage, and say maybe I'm married and I give birth immediately to 3 children. So I'd be this kind of people who are stuck in these bad and abusive marriages as well. So I think this is what works for me, waiting until I'm ready. Uh, Whatever happens will happen, but my happiness and my independence and my happiness as a person, independence, I think comes first, building myself first, finding myself first before I commit to somebody. So that if when I'm going into marriage, I already know who I am. I already can stand on my own and I can speak for myself in that marriage. I think that will make for a better, a stronger, and a happier life in future. So I don't think the statistics or society should dictate to people that you're 23 or 24, so you need to rush. Time is running out. Your time to get married is running out. You'll be old. No man will take you at that age. At 30, at 31, at 32. No man wants to marry such an old woman. They're looking for this young 23, 24, 25-year-olds, which is fine if that is what they want. But I think you're mature, you're better as a person. So if you're going into this with somebody, it will make that relationship and that marriage even better, as opposed to subscribing to society's standards of 23, 24, 21.
I think you're absolutely right, and I do think that the longer that people in general delay marriage, delay children, the more income that they will have, so that they can provide that marriage and those children with the resources needed to be successful in life. I got pregnant at 18 years old, and honestly, like the relationship I was in when I got pregnant was just a fling before college, and it ended up being a 3 year terrible situation for both of us because we were children trying to raise a child. And those were very hard 3 years from the time I was 18 till I was 21. And if I went back now I would give my daughter up for adoption, which was my original plan when I had her. Um, but my mother talked me out of it. It was against cultural values, and she wanted to have her grandbaby around, and it became very much about like what the family wanted versus what was best for me and the other person responsible for this child. Um, when we had actually both come to the conclusion together that yeah, it's probably best for us to give this child up for adoption, and we were even talking about his mother possibly taking her for a few years and raising her until we got our acts together because we were 18 and he was 19 and had no prospects for college. I had a full college scholarship ready to go and then couldn't take it because I got pregnant. So, and not having options that young, it, you get sucked into poverty and you can't get out of it. I wasn't able to escape poverty until I got divorced, and now I'm just like barely out of poverty, but I'm able to like take care of myself, and I have some extra money. I don't feel constantly worried about the bills like I used to, but I think I could have had that a lot sooner in life had I delayed children, delayed marriage, delayed all of that. And I feel like I'm just now getting to figure out who I am as a person because I sacrificed those 18 years of my life trying to make right this one mistake that I made when I was 18. And so I feel like I've more than paid my dues on that, and now I can like start living my life again. Um, but yeah, it does kind of make me regret like how much more could I have accomplished in life had I just put my foot down and said, no, this is really the best thing for not only the child, but also the father and myself. To delay having children, to delay marriage, to really get ourselves together first. So I think you're absolutely right that we need to be teaching our young people to do that. So are there currently any programs right now in Kenya, in Nairobi even something as simple as like community talks with girls, like inviting LUO women to a potluck or to a coffee, to just have these conversations with young women to teach them that they are valued, and they deserve respect and they deserve more than what they're getting? Or are there opportunities for that?
I think there are a lot of opportunities for that. There isn't like one. I've not had. I don't. I'm not sure, but I've not heard of one specific organization doing that exclusively. But there are women who are very local about these kind of things, and they talk. There are a lot of these social media groups which are just about empowering such women and just talking about such issues. I know of one group that is just particularly for Luo women to talk about the issues they're facing in their marriages, and they get a lot of advice from these women all over the world. Luo women from all over they're somewhere abroad who have experienced the Western kind of life, how they're supposed to be like, how different it is over there, and how different how society views things, issues over there, how things are in Kenya. There are women who here in Kenya as well have different experiences in their marriage, different advices. So there's that community, that rural community, and just talking things out and teaching these younger people uh, how to be more independent, happier in their marriages. So yeah, there's opportunity for that, and it is also like happening. I'm in one of those groups, and the advice that people highlight the situation they're facing in their marriages, and they're really giving good advice. So it's just about executing such, and I think it should also be like scaled up into the rural areas, because most people in this modern or the towns and the Nairobi and the metropolitan areas and the urban areas, I think, are more empowered and have better standing in taking care in like standing up and speaking their minds and being independent, as opposed to people who are growing up in the rural areas. And we have like the bigger percentage of rural youth are going through these things in the rural areas. So I think there's that need, that extreme need for such platforms to be established in such settings to help these women be better human beings, be better people.
That sounds amazing. Like as a social entrepreneur, I'm sitting here thinking of the situation like, okay, well, let's problem solve it. How do we fix this? This is a societal problem. How do we solve it sustainably, and get this message out to these girls? Um, so immediately the wheels start turning in my brain. Like there could be opportunities for, like, since they already have those social media groups, they could start sponsoring coffee talks, and to have people bring potluck dinners, and start those discussions. And then from there, like that can lead to podcasts, book series. There are lots of ways to fund those things, by creating content that is sellable, that is marketable, and then using the content to also educate these girls. So I think that's a really good opportunity that could definitely be looked at in Kenya. So maybe we can get the word out about that. That would be awesome to see those programs get started. So, Roni, is there any, like, I know we're going to continue these conversations throughout the coming weeks, but as far as, like, talking about, in particular, it looks like we focused today mostly on, like, LUO culture, especially in regards to relationships between men and women, and is there any, like, final message that you want to leave about, like, what changes you want to see in LUO culture, what parts you want to see kept in LUO culture, and how you see your traditions moving forward?
So these such platforms that we've talked about are things that really like extremely need to happen, because empowerment and self-stability and self-empowerment is really important, and the next step to getting women to have better quality lives, to value themselves more, to see themselves as independent, important, worthy of respect human beings in the society, and not just existing to service men, or to make men feel better about themselves, or to make men the superior beings that they are. Because I think that as Luo women, and keeping such oppressive parts of our cultures and our traditions, I like our cultures and our traditions. They are what makes us who we are as a community and as a people. But I think we need to not really change them, but make them work for us as women, make us more empowered, make us better, make us live better lives in our marriages, yeah, and in the society as well.
I think you're right on key with all of those. And I think that it's not just like Luo culture is showing a microcosm of that, but this is systemic all over the world, in most cultures. And I think that the Western European cultures have done a really good job of starting to eliminate that very well. I think moving forward, women can start looking towards those cultures and saying, hey, they've got some really good equal rights there. We deserve the same thing. So, and I can't wait to continue these conversations with you as we get into the other issues and misconceptions about Africa. But I just want to thank you so much for speaking with me and speaking past our time. So I also appreciate that, because we've gone about 20 minutes over your time, and you've been kind enough to stay and offer up your time for this. So, Roni, thank you so much for talking to me today, and I can't wait to speak with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you too for having me. And yeah, let's talk more next week on other issues.
So thank you for joining us here at Hitchhiker's Guide to Humanity podcast. This has been Krys Copeland speaking with Roni, who is the human of Mako the alien. And we will be speaking with her again soon about more aspects of Kenyan culture and Luo culture, and the different misconceptions that we have about Africa and how that affects the situations going on around the world right now. So thank you for joining in.